Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is September 20th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we are going to be asking ourselves, is Russia preparing for a general mobilization? Let's get into it. Okay, so when we look at the map, we see that while there hasn't been a ton of changes to the actual front line, Russia appears to possibly be holding this defensive line here between Lyman and the Oxley River. There's still some signs that, of course, Ukrainian forces continue to advance. They've officially declared Bilohorivka liberated, as well as Yarova liberated. So again, this is not unexpected. I think the Russians really want to define a clear line, defensive line straight along this stretch here, and perhaps they've even succeeded in doing so, at least for a time. But the real news is not necessarily on the battlefield. The real news is that yesterday, the puppet governments of the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts urged the Russian parliament to immediately hold a referendum recognizing the DNR and LNR as Russian subjects. This is actually this is a change from what we've seen before, where DNR and LNR were being treated as though they were going to be independent republics, that Russia was going to give them at least the facsimile of independence, but in fact would function as puppet states, similar to places like Belarus and Moldova. But this would actually make the DNR and LNR, in fact, true parts of Russia, closer to Alaska and Hawaii in the United States than, again, independent but allied countries. What's worrying, this is worrying for a bunch of reasons. First off, it would of course mean that the Ukrainians technically are now invading Russian sovereign territory, because the DNR and LNR, as you may have noticed, don't really control even the territory that they believe constitutes their country. You see this giant thing here. But what's more worrying about this is that it, of course, means that Russia in its state media claims that Russia would be more easily able to threaten NATO with retaliatory strikes for Ukrainian counterattacks, and would describe it as untying Russia's hands in all respects. Now, I think us as readers, as the public, and as other countries, Russia wants us to think that they are imminently close to using nuclear weapons in this conflict. I don't believe that is the case. But this partial annexation, right, declaring the DNR and LNR part of Russian sovereign territory, would put the Kremlin in the strange position of demanding that Ukrainian forces deoccupy or unoccupy Russian territory, and the humiliating position of being unable to enforce that demand. Right, it would make Putin look extremely weak for being unable to force the Ukrainians to back away from what is suddenly Russian sovereign territory. Now, no amount of legal mumbo jumbo is going to change the reality on the ground, right? The other 197 countries on Earth see this for what it is, which is just a fig leaf, a smoke and mirrors, trying to create a legal defense around an unjustified invasion of another country. But what the rumors are saying is that even though this would be sort of humiliating, of Russia being unable to push Ukraine out of its own territory, and claiming that it will bring it be more able to threaten NATO, which is sort of ridiculous at the outset, because NATO, as you guys might have noticed, Russian strikes can't take out Ukrainian forces, right? What makes you think they are going to pose any meaningful threat to NATO itself? Now, what it probably is a pretext for is a general mobilization. Why do I think that? Well, it's simple, because it is morally and legally difficult to get a general mobilization. By the way, general mobilization means a draft It's hard to start drafting the general public when the threat to your country doesn't feel existential, right? This would be sort of like the Vietnam War in the United States, where there was a large-scale draft, a large-scale mobilization, but, excuse me, but it was not to defend U.S. sovereign territory. It was to defend a sort of allied nation on the other side of the world that had little strategic or economic value to the United States. That was one of the reasons the war became so incredibly wildly unpopular. And this was in a country where leaders were able to be elected, right? So you could imagine how furious the Russian public will be if they start drafting everyone's husbands and sons to defend countries that don't even technically exist, the DNR and LNR. But Putin hopes, I think, that this, by making them sovereign territory, by making the Ukrainian forces invaders of Russian territory, that spin will make them more likely to support a general mobilization. The problem is, of course, the voting public is not actually stupid, despite what some leadership in every country seems to believe. And most, I suspect, 99% of Russians will understand that their country isn't actually being invaded, that this was some sort of legal wrangling they concocted to make it seem that a country that is not part of Russia actually is part of Russia. So what will we see in the future potentially? There are some rumors that refugee centers have turned into mobilization centers, right? In Russia, right? Those were centers meant to process DNR and LNR refugees. Obviously, if they're part of Russian sovereign territory, you can't be refugees, just like I'm not a refugee from Pennsylvania just because I was born there. But what it would be instead is a mobilization center that would basically process new draftees. Now, will this actually make a difference? The answer is probably. The reason I say that is because Russia definitely has equipment shortages, like a lot of equipment shortages. But from the Soviet era, Russia mass-produced gear on a scale that it's hard to fully grasp for us in the West. They have millions upon millions upon millions of, simple AK-47s, AK-74s. They probably have millions and millions of the simple Soviet Afghan era body armor. They have millions and millions of the old steel helmets. These are all extremely outdated, but even if they make you 25% as effective as a fully kitted Ukrainian soldier, Russia being able to get 1 million plus people to the battlefield is still going to make a difference. And as we've seen in conflicts like the Second World War, the war in Chechnya, Russia is willing to just play war like an RTS, right? They're willing to just spam units and throw them at the enemy until the enemy just simply runs out of bullets, even if it means incurring massive casualties. Will Russia be able to actually maintain control of its country in the face of such a mobilization and an aggressive strategy? I don't know. But the real question is, will Ukraine be able to continue to put quality fighting forces into the field, and will that be enough to counter this Russian general mobilization, if it indeed comes to that? I strongly think so, but I've certainly been wrong before, and I hope I'm wrong this time. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this daily update. Of course, if you want access to the uncensored combat video breakdowns that YouTube won't let me show you, you want to become a member of the Patreon. Thanks so much to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys make this possible. The link is in the description. I'll see you in the next one.